2026, that there's not a war that has happened, but there's a lot of military might, if you will, that has been prepared in the Middle East, specifically targeting around Iran and all this stuff. We want to know, well, what's the biblical significance within this?
What you're seeing in the Middle East right now isn't just another war. It's a prophecy that's 2,600 years old. Ezekiel 38, Gog, Magog, Persia, names you've heard before. But have you noticed something? The pieces are moving right now.
Biblical scholars at institutions including Southwest Radio Ministries and Lamb and Lion Ministries spent decades mapping a 2,600-year-old Hebrew text against modern geopolitics. And researchers say the alignment has never looked more precise than it does right now. What that scholar is pointing to is not a vague spiritual metaphor. It is a specific military coalition named Nation by Nation that a Hebrew prophet recorded 6 centuries before the birth of Christ. In June 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, striking dozens of Iranian nuclear facilities in a coordinated surprise attack. The world called it the 12-Day War. The IAEA, just weeks before the strikes, had confirmed that Iran possessed enough enriched uranium for 9 nuclear warheads. Within 12 days, the United States had joined the operation, B-2 bombers hitting the Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow facilities. Khamenei was dead by February 2026. The Islamic Republic's military backbone, built over 40 years, had been shattered. What almost nobody discussed in the days that followed was a detail that should have stopped every commentator mid-sentence. The name Persia, the name the world used for Iran until 1935, appears in a Hebrew text written around 590 BC, not as a vague allusion, not buried in allegory, listed by name as one of the nations in a military coalition that would one day move against Israel. The same text names the coalition's leader. It describes the geography of the attack. It specifies what God says will happen when it begins. And there are not one, but 3 separate biblical texts written by 3 different men across 2 different centuries, each describing modern Iran from a different angle. When scholars mapped all 3 against the geography of today's Iran, something happened that none of them expected. The details don't align in a general sense. They align at the level of specific locations: a coastline, a river, a fault line, a nuclear facility. That discovery was only the beginning. What came next changed the conversation entirely. To understand why scholars are treating this moment as unprecedented, you have to go back to the ancient city of Susa. Susa, known in the Bible as Shushan, sits in the Khuzestan province of what is now southwestern Iran. Today, it is a dusty, sun-baked ruin at the edge of the Iraqi border. Stand there in summer, and the heat comes off the ground in visible waves. The air carries the dry mineral smell of cracked earth. There is almost no shade. The mud brick walls of the ancient palace have been eroding for 2,000 years, slowly returning to the desert floor. Somewhere beneath your feet are the throne rooms where Persian kings received foreign ambassadors. Above you, the sky is a flat, bleached white. The silence is total except for the wind. In 551 BC, Susa was one of the most magnificent cities on earth. It was the winter capital of the Persian Empire, the city where the Book of Esther is set, where Nehemiah served as cupbearer to the king. A man-made canal called the Ulai ran through its outskirts, a 900-foot-wide waterway engineered by Persian workers, connecting 2 tributaries of the Euphrates. By the river Ulai, according to the Hebrew text, was where the prophet Daniel was standing when he saw the vision recorded in Daniel 8. That vision is the first thread. Daniel saw a ram with 2 horns of unequal height. It was charging westward, northward, and southward, overthrowing every animal in its path. Nothing could stand against it. Then a goat appeared from the west, moving so fast it barely touched the ground. It struck the ram with such force that both horns shattered. The ram fell. The goat stood over it. Daniel did not need to interpret this himself. The archangel Gabriel stood beside him and provided the translation in plain language. "The ram which you saw having 2 horns," Gabriel said, "are the kings of Media and Persia." That is Daniel 8:20. It is not a metaphor. It is an explicit identification made by Gabriel of what the ram represents. Persia, the dominant horn, is what we call Iran today. And the location where the vision occurred, as theologian John Mark Hicks of Lipscomb University has noted, corresponds precisely to the ancient region of Elam, southwestern Iran, the coast of the Persian Gulf, the territory that would hold, 2,500 years later, Iran's most strategically important nuclear installation. For decades, most scholars read Daniel 8 as a closed prophecy. Historically, Alexander the Great, the goat from the west, did destroy the Persian Empire in 331 BC, just as the text described. Fulfilled, complete, case closed. Then one small phrase began drawing attention, and the case was no longer closed. The phrase is found in verse 17, where Gabriel says to Daniel, "Understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end." Then in verse 19, "I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be." Then in verse 26, "Seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future." 3 separate, deliberate repetitions in the same chapter, all directing the reader to a future application of what is being described. Dr. David Reagan of Lamb and Lion Ministries, one of the most widely cited Bible prophecy researchers in the United States, has written extensively that this triple repetition was intentional, a structural marker embedded in the text for a generation that would encounter it at a specific historical moment. That observation alone would have been enough to reopen the debate. Then scholars noticed the geography. Specifically, they noticed where Iran's nuclear program was built. The Bushehr nuclear power plant sits on the eastern shore of the Persian Gulf. Russian engineers helped construct it. It went online in 2011. It is the centerpiece of Iran's nuclear ambitions, and it sits inside the territorial boundaries of what the prophet Jeremiah, writing within a few years of Daniel, called Elam. Ancient Elam covered precisely the southwestern coastal region of modern Iran, from the northern edge of the Persian Gulf inland to the Zagros Mountains. Daniel's vision took place in Elam. The location of Iran's nuclear program is in Elam. The two facts existed separately for 2,500 years. In the last 2 decades, they began to overlap. At this point, the researchers assumed they had noticed an interesting coincidence. They were wrong. Jeremiah 49:34 is not a famous passage. It is not read aloud in most churches. It does not appear in popular devotional texts. It begins like this: "That which came as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet concerning Elam." In this chapter, Jeremiah delivers prophetic declarations against a series of nations: Ammon, Edom, Damascus, Kedar, Hazor, and finally, last of all, Elam. Scholar Bill Salas, a Bible prophecy researcher whose work on this passage was endorsed by Dr. David Reagan, documented over several years that every other nation addressed in this section of Jeremiah received a historical fulfillment of its prophecy in the ancient world. Elam is the only exception. There is no recorded ancient event that matches the scale and specifics of what Jeremiah describes. The prophecy has 5 elements. First, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. Second, God will bring judgment from all 4 directions simultaneously. Third, there shall be no nation to which the outcasts of Elam shall not come, a global dispersal. Fourth, I will set my throne in Elam and destroy from there the king and the princes. Fifth, in verse 39, in the latter days I will bring back the captivity of Elam. The bow in the ancient world was the signature weapon of the Elamites. They were renowned archers. The bow was their military identity, their most advanced offensive capability. The phrase, chief of their might, is, in the original Hebrew, a reference to the foremost expression of their power. Now, read that in 2025. If you're finding this investigation as compelling as we do, a like genuinely helps this channel keep going deeper on stories like this. Iran's nuclear program, its enriched uranium stockpile, its ballistic missile capability, its network of underground underground facilities, was the acknowledged centerpiece of its military power. It was the thing Iran's leaders had spent 40 years building, the thing that brought international sanctions, the thing that prompted covert sabotage, the thing that brought 200 Israeli fighter jets screaming into Iranian airspace on the morning of June 13, 2025. By the end of the 12-day war, that capability was severely degraded. American B-2 bombers had dropped bunker-busting munitions on Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. Broken. The data was clear. The implications were anything but. Consider now the third element of Jeremiah's prophecy, the dispersal. There shall be no nation to which the outcasts of Elam shall not come. No ancient historian records a mass exile of the Elamite population to every corner of the known world. It didn't happen in 596 BC when Babylon raided Elam. It didn't happen when Persia absorbed Elam into its empire. The text waited. After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, a wave of Iranians began leaving the country. That wave has never stopped. It accelerated during the Iran-Iraq War, surged after the 2009 Green Movement was crushed, and reached historic levels after 2019 as the economy collapsed under sanctions. Today, the Iranian diaspora numbers in the millions and is present in more than 90 countries. Piruz, an Iranian-born Jewish believer who left Tehran as a young man and was later interviewed by the Israeli ministry One for Israel, said this about Jeremiah 49. You mention any country, any island, and somehow in the world there is an Iranian there. I've just been flabbergasted. They're in Malaysia, they're in Indonesia, they're in Australia, they're in Britain, France, the US, in every state, Canada, South America. There's some sort of presence, small or big, in every nation. They've been spread around the world, just like the Jewish people. That is a diaspora, described in 597 BC. And then there is Jeremiah 49:38. I will set my throne in Elam and destroy from there the king and the princes. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a second round of coordinated strikes. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the most powerful figure in Iran's theocratic government, was killed. The regime that had governed Iran since 1979 began to fracture. The sequence described in Jeremiah, military capability broken, people scattered, king and officials destroyed, had, across 9 months, traced its outline across the front pages of every major newspaper on Earth. There is no easy way to say this, so we'll say it plainly. Now comes Ezekiel 38, and this is where the three prophecies converge. Ezekiel was writing from exile in Babylon, on the banks of the Chebar River in what is now southern Iraq, at approximately the same time Jeremiah was writing in Jerusalem and Daniel was receiving visions in Susa. 3 Jewish writers, 3 different locations, 3 texts that, when laid side by side, describe the same nation from 3 different angles. Ezekiel 38:5 lists the coalition of nations that will one day move against Israel: Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the uttermost parts of the north. The leader of the coalition is identified in verse 2 as Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. For more than a century, biblical scholars have argued about the identity of Magog. The most widely held interpretation, held by Dr. John Walvoord, former president of Dallas Theological Seminary, and Dr. Randall Price of Liberty University's Center for Judaic Studies, identifies Magog with the territory north of the Black and Caspian Seas. The word Rosh, appearing in verse 2, was identified by the 19th century German Hebrew lexicographer Wilhelm Gesenius, whose dictionary remains foundational to modern Hebrew scholarship, as a proper noun referring to a northern people. The root Rus is where Russia comes from. The mapping of Ezekiel's coalition against modern nations goes like this: Magog, Russia; Persia, Iran; Sudan and the Horn of Africa; Libya and North Africa; Gomer, Central Asia and Turkey; Beth Togarmah, the Caucasus, possibly Eastern Turkey. Now consider what has been happening in the real world for the past decade. Russia armed Iran with advanced fighter jets and S-300 missile defense systems. Russia and Iran have conducted joint naval exercises in the Persian Gulf. Russia maintained military bases in Syria, directly bordering Israel, throughout the Gaza war. After the 12-day war, Russia condemned Israel's strikes as unprovoked armed aggression. Turkey shifted its geopolitical alignment away from its NATO partners toward Moscow and Tehran. Libya and Sudan have seen Russian military contractors extend their presence. The Houthis in Yemen, Iranian-backed, repeatedly attacked Israeli shipping. That coalition described in Ezekiel 38. Look at a map of today's Middle East. Then look at the text. Seen from a distance, it looks like a footnote in a religious debate. Up close, it is a geopolitical earthquake. Here is where honest journalism requires a pause. No responsible scholar should claim that what happened in 2025 was the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. The prophecy describes an invasion of Israel, an attack on Israeli soil led by a northern power. What happened in 2025 was the opposite. Israel attacked Iran. The text describes Israel dwelling in security and peace when the assault comes. Israel in 2025 was anything but peaceful. Ezekiel 38 has not happened. What is being said carefully by scholars who have spent decades in these texts is that the preconditions described in Ezekiel 38 have now materialized for the first time in history. The specific alliance, the specific nations, the specific geopolitical alignment. These conditions did not exist in 1940. They did not exist in 1967. They did not exist in 1990. They exist now. Some researchers, including prophecy analyst Robert Clifton Robinson, argue that we are living in what he calls the preliminary stages of the Ezekiel 38 alignment. He points to a detail in verse 8, the Hebrew phrase acharit shanim, translated in the latter years, as a textual marker that the original readers would have recognized as end times language, not a description of events in Ezekiel's own time. Others are less certain. Scholars at Oxford's Faculty of Theology and at Hebrew Union College read these passages as historical documents whose reference belong entirely to the ancient world. John Walvoord himself acknowledged that the identification of Magog with Russia is a probability, not a certainty. No one can read these texts and walk away with absolute confidence about timing. There is, however, one more detail in the prophecy sequence that no one who studies it carefully can entirely set aside. Bill Salas noted years ago that when Ezekiel lists Iran's role in the coalition in chapter 38, he calls it Persia. He does not call it Elam. Ezekiel knew the name Elam. He uses it elsewhere. Its absence from chapter 38, Salas argued, was deliberate. By the time of the Ezekiel 38 coalition, Elam would have already been dealt with separately. The nuclear heartland, the bow of Elam's might, along the Persian Gulf coast would be gone. Iran would still exist as Persia in a diminished form, joining a larger alliance rather than leading one. Shattered, but not erased. If that reading is correct, the events of 2025 and 2026 don't represent the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. They represent the setup for it. One controversial theory, circulating in serious prophecy circles, suggests that what God promised in Jeremiah 49:39, "In the latter days I will restore the fortunes of Elam," points to something that happens after the Ezekiel 38 war is over. That the Iranian people, scattered across the world, return not to the Islamic Republic, but to something else, something entirely different. That the revival of Christianity in Iran, from roughly 500 known believers in 1979 to an estimated several million today, making it the fastest growing evangelical population on earth, is itself a data point in the prophetic sequence. None of that can be stated as established fact. It is interpretation built on interpretation. The caution is warranted. Of course, there are simpler explanations: coincidence, pattern matching, the human tendency to see meaning in random correspondence. These explanations deserve to be taken seriously, but pattern matching doesn't write the same coalition from the same geography pointing toward the same outcome across 3 books written by 3 different people across 2 centuries. And coincidence doesn't put a nuclear reactor on the same coastline where a prophet stood in a vision and received a message about military power being broken. The data doesn't care about our comfort. There is something that deserves to be said slowly before we reach any conclusion. Peruz did not read Jeremiah 49 as a theological curiosity. He read it as a man whose family left Iran when he was a student in Philadelphia, who watched them make Aliyah to Israel while he stayed in the United States, who has spent decades living as an Iranian in a world that has no shortage of Iranian exiles. He read it and said, "This is today." It's been happening for a while. He was not triumphant. He was not performing certainty for an audience. He said it the way a person says something when the text they are reading sounds too much like their own life. That is a different category of recognition. The people who wrote these texts died more than 2,000 years ago. They had no knowledge of nuclear reactors. They didn't know what uranium was. They couldn't have anticipated satellite imagery or B-2 bombers or the Strait of Hormuz or the International Atomic Energy Agency publishing a report 3 weeks before a war confirming that a nation had enough enriched material for 9 warheads. And yet what they described, a specific nation in a specific location with a specific kind of military capability, whose people would be scattered to every nation, whose king and officials would be destroyed, who would join a northern-led coalition against Israel, has traced its shape, one event at a time, across the headlines of the last 18 months. The documents are real. They are ancient. They are in the public domain. Anyone can read them. Most people never do. That, more than anything else in this story, is the thing worth sitting with. Ezekiel 38 ends with a passage that has no historical parallel. No army fulfilled it. No general described achieving it. After the coalition attacks, the text says, God intervenes directly, not through a counterattack, not through a political alliance. A massive earthquake strikes. Fire and sulfur fall. The invading armies turn on each other in confusion. And then verse 39:7 says this, I will make known my holy name among my people Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned. And the nations will know that I, the Lord, am the Holy One in Israel. Every other element of Ezekiel 38 is described in geopolitical language. Nations, armies, alliances, geography. Then this, a moment so decisive, so global in its visibility, that it ends the question of whether the God of Israel exists. That event has not happened. Either it is still ahead, or it is, as serious academic scholars argue, the symbolic language of an ancient writer describing something that already occurred in a form we no longer recognize. Those are the 2 options. Both deserve to be held with intellectual honesty. But here is what is not in dispute. The nations named in that text exist. The coalition Ezekiel described is forming. The military capability Jeremiah called the bow of Elam was, by mid-2025, shattered. The king and princes of that ancient territory were dead by early 2026. And as of April 2026, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that sits at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, at the edge of the territory Jeremiah called Elam, disrupting global trade in a way the world has never seen. The prophecy, if that is what it is, has not ended. According to the text itself, the final act has not yet been written. So the question worth asking is not whether any of this matches the headlines. It does. The question is whether 3 men writing in 3 different cities in 2 different centuries with no access to the political maps of the modern world somehow described the geopolitical architecture of 2025 with the precision of people who had seen it? Or is it possible that something else is happening, that the nations named in these texts were always going to end up in this configuration because the forces that shape history are not random, and these writers understood something about those forces that we have not yet fully decoded? If this opened a door for you that you didn't know was there, share it with someone who needs to see what's on the other side of it. The text is still there. The events are still unfolding, and the last page of this particular story has not yet been written.